Okay, so I now want to turn to what is, to me, one of the more insane pieces I have seen recently. The social left wants to have it both ways. On the one hand, they want to say that sexual promiscuity and sexual liberation is a grand and glorious thing for everyone involved. On the other hand, they want to say that everyone's subjective perception of sexual conduct must be taken seriously. Well, you can't have it both ways. Either sex is generally a good so long as it is quote-unquote consensual, and they never define exactly what level of consent is necessary, because sometimes they say Monica Lewinsky could consent, sometimes they say she couldn't, sometimes they say 13-year-old girls can consent, sometimes they say they can't. But in any case, the left has this weird ethos where they know bad when they see it. They have a Potter Stewart ethic with regard to that. Potter Stewart's the guy who said that he couldn't define pornography, but he knew it when he saw it. The left has that with regard to sexual ethics more broadly. So evidence of this, Zoe Heller is a columnist for The New Yorker, and she writes an entire piece called In Defense of Adulterers. Right, talking about how adultery is natural and normal and probably good. So she starts off by talking about how our increasingly licentious behavior has not been reflected in more tolerant public attitudes toward infidelity. We've become considerably more relaxed about premarital sex, gay sex, and interracial sex, but our disapproval of extramarital sex has been largely unaffected by our growing propensity to engage in it. We're eating forbidden apples more hungrily than ever, but we slap ourselves with every bite. According to a 2017 Gallup poll, Americans deplore adultery at much higher rates than they do abortion, animal testing, or euthanasia. Now, by the way, I think adultery is less of a sin than abortion. Because murder outranks adultery in the pantheon. But in any case, this columnist writes that there's something about adultery that we need to get over. We just need to get over adultery. And then they wonder why it is that men are not taking seriously admonitions about sexual morality. In order for men to act in sexually moral fashion, or for women to act in sexually moral fashion, that must be built into a society that suggests male and female roles and what sex's role in life is. Okay, I think that you can come up with a series of thou shalt not, right? Thou shalt not do X, thou shalt not do Y. But the problem is a definitional one. When you say thou shalt not commit adultery, well, what about an open marriage? Is that adultery? Or thou shalt not commit, what if the wife is really mean to you? What if your husband is not so nice and has not been helping you out at home? And the problem is that we as human beings have a strong tendency to redefine terms. So thou shalt nots may seem clear on paper, but in practice, they get very unclear once human brains wrap around them, which is why you need an entire system of thought. You need a worldview in order to effectuate thou shalt nots. Right? We think that we can basically say thou shalt not on a societal level and everybody will follow it. We can see that's not the case. We've been saying thou shalt not sexually harass for the last 50 years in the United States. Obviously, that hasn't stopped a lot of men who have redefined sexual harassment. And now we're redefining it again. And now women are redefining sexual harassment. Stuff they said was not sexual harassment 10 years ago is being treated as sexual harassment now, and vice versa. In any case, this New Yorker columnist writes, traditional couples therapy focuses on the defense and enforcement of the monogamous pact and tends to side firmly and explicitly with the faithful spouse. He or she is often referred to as the injured party, while the straying partner is labeled the perpetrator. Right, because, you know, adultery. The standard assumption is that the affair is a symptom either of marital dysfunction or of some pathology on the part of the perpetrator. Sex addiction and fear of intimacy are the most common diagnoses, although lately a genetic predisposition to infidelity has been gaining traction. This approach, writes an author whom, Esther Perel, I guess, is the author of a book on adultery, and this is a book review. This approach, Esther Perel believes, does little justice to the multifaceted experience of infidelity. Oh boy. It demonizes adulterers without pausing to explore their motives, right? Because sometimes motives don't matter. You committing adultery is not a good thing. If you want to cheat on your spouse, maybe instead of cheating on your spouse, you should control yourself or have a discussion with your spouse or get divorced if your marriage is that failing. It focuses on the traumatic effect of affairs without acknowledging their generative possibilities. I love this. Adultery isn't just something we should overlook or pretend away. It's something we should celebrate. She writes, to look at straying simply in terms of its ravages is not only reductionist, but also unhelpful. Affairs can be devastatingly painful for the ones betrayed, but they can also be invigorating for marriages. Yes, I would like to see a statistical study on how many affairs were invigorating for marriages. This is a bunch of crap that is pushed forward by the left media. It's another one of these. Charles Murray has a great book, I believe it's called Coming Apart, all about how basically there are a bunch of white liberals who live in big cities who don't abide by their own sexual morality that they propagate to the rest of society. Basically, Murray's thesis is that if you look at the perspectives on marriage in Los Angeles and New York among upper-class liberals, what you will see is that they are all married, and they all stay together for the most part, and they all do not commit adultery. They act in traditional sexual ways, basically, in the big cities, contra to the stuff they put out on TV, and then people who don't know better imitate that, and they end up with unhappier lives. This is one of Murray's theses, and I think it has some real heft to it. In any case, this author writes, affairs can be devastatingly painful for the ones betrayed. They can also be invigorating. If couples could be persuaded to take a more sympathetic, less catastrophic view of infidelity, they would, she proposes, have a better chance of weathering its occasional occurrence. When people ask her if she is for or against affairs, her standard response is yes. Oh, yeah, I can't see how this would go wrong in any way. Perel, who's Belgian-born but practices in New York, is much sought after for her sophisticated, European-flavored insights into love and desire, because clearly, if we want to look to a society that has a healthy sexual ethos that has not resulted in a mass drop in the birth rate and the importation of people from third world countries in order to fill the labor gap that's been created, you know, if we want to look to a place that has completely destroyed the institution of marriage and has therefore reduced the possibility of happiness for a great number of people, perhaps we should look to Europe. Europe is, like, I always look to the French. I always think the French, those are the people who I'm looking to for my sexual morality. Mating in Captivity, the book that brought her public notice, was a sprightly disquisition on the anaphrodisiac effects of married life, in which she argued that the excessive value placed on communication and transparency in modern relationships tends to foster conjugal coziness at the expense of erotic vitality. Her suggestion that couples seek to sustain their elan vital would do well to cultivate a little distance and mystery was not originally or particularly radical. No, it is not original or radical. The idea that, you know, you and your wife don't have to share everything with one another because that sort of kills the mystery, that's not new. I mean, if you watch the musical The Fantastics, that's actually one of the concluding lines of the musical The Fantastics, which came out in the 1960s. But what she also says is that adultery is basically okay in many situations. She says she's been accused of trivializing the scourge of infidelity and of promoting ideas that are fundamentally hostile to the institution of marriage. It's difficult, however, to find any real evidence for these charges. Perel is more sanguine than others about the capacity of a marriage to withstand adulterous lapses, but her belief in coupledom is never in doubt. She takes a very stern line on what she sees as the excessive sense of entitlement that contemporary couples bring to their relationships. So this is the part I agree with, right? That you have to work at marriage, that you have to actually, you know, work at your sex life. Like these are things that I think are important in marriage, because the level of passionate, as Jonathan Haidt says, the level of passionate love in a relationship starts off here at the top and declines over time, and the level of coupleship, basically trust in marriage, increases radically over time. Companionate love, that makes it moves it in a very, you know, in a companionate direction. All of that is true, but saying that adultery is therefore okay is really ridiculous. She says she wants to address a traditional bias against cheating spouses, to acknowledge the point of view of both parties, what it did to one and what it meant to the other. In practice, it must be said, her method seems to demand heroic levels of forbearance on the part of faithful spouses. Yes, that would be true. That is exactly right. But you know, the entire idea of the left is that we're going to rewrite all of the sexual rules and that it will have no impact. It will, in fact, make things better. It has not made things better for the great majority of people. But Democrats are now thinking that they can use the Roy Moore playbook against Donald Trump. So Tom Perez over at the DNC, he says that Trump isn't just a bad president, he's the worst president in American history.
What do you say to progressives? You want to have a message that's not just anti-Trump, which I'm guessing also means it's not just about impeachment. What do you tell those in the Democratic base that says, no, Mr. Chairman, they do want to talk impeachment? What do you say to them?
Well, I say to them, here's where we agree. This is the worst president, perhaps, in American history. This tax way to wealthy people and very large corporations that don't need it is an abomination. The effort to backdoor repeal the Affordable Care Act is unconscionable. The culture of corruption in Washington, like there was in Alabama.
We've had presidents like James Buchanan. We've had presidents like Andrew Johnson, who was impeached. We've had presidents like LBJ, who's a disastrous president. We've had presidents like Woodrow Wilson, another disastrous president. We've had Jimmy Carter be our president. Like there are a lot of really bad presidents. President Obama's on that list. By the way, I don't think Obama's the worst president in American history. I think Obama's top 5 bad, but I don't think he's the worst president in American history. There are a lot of presidents who have been more damaging than President Obama. But the idea that Donald Trump is the worst president after a year, what's he done that makes him the worst president in American history? I don't think he's been a great president by any stretch of the imagination. If I had to grade him now, I'd give him about a C-. I like some of the things that he's done. I think he's undercut that with a lot of his rhetoric. I think if he would stop tweeting and stop talking, he'd be a B- president. But the idea that he's the worst president in American history, this is Democrats getting ahead of themselves. And if they think that they're going to be able to defeat Trump just by shouting at him, they tried that in the last election cycle, and it did not work. You see, Bernie Sanders is doing this too. He's now accusing Trump of having severe emotional problems. Like, why exactly a kook old socialist, a nutcase who honeymooned in the USSR and goes around talking about how we need to pay for everyone's college, make college free, without any plan to pay for it, how he's talking about the serious emotional problems of Donald Trump is beyond me.
You got a president who has been accused by many, many women of harassment, to say the least. This is a guy who was on a tape seen by everybody in America, essentially bragging about his sexual assault of women. Do I think under those considerations of Al Franken resign, do I think the president should resign? I do. Do I think he will? I don't. But yes, I do think he should resign.
He should resign because he has severe emotional... The Democrats who are pushing this hard, that Trump should resign, that he has to go, there could be a backlash here to the overreach. There really could. And when I say backlash to the overreach, I'm talking also about the media overreach here, because the media overreach here is pretty astonishing. I mean, the level of media overreach is pretty insane. So I want to show you some of the things the media have been saying about this Alabama race, because they're truly quite nuts. So first of all, I'll start with this tweet that just came out. This is about Trump, not the Alabama race. David Leonhardt, who is a pretty good reporter over at the New York Times, or can be from time to time, he says that after we published a list of Trump lies this summer, some of his supporters asked us to compare Trump to other presidents. We've done so and just published the results. And there's a chart. It shows Trump has lied 103 times in his first year. It says in his first 10 months, Trump told nearly 6 times as many falsehoods as Obama did during his entire presidency. It says Obama only told 18 lies his entire presidency. And then you wonder why people don't trust the media? You wonder why when the media go berserk, the media don't pay any attention to it? It's because of stupidities like this. You wonder why Trump says fake news and everybody sort of nods along? It's because that's fake news. If you think President Obama only told 18 lies his entire presidency, that's insipid. It's absurd. If you want to say he's a bigger liar than Obama, you can probably make a statistical case for it. But to say that in 8 years Obama told 18 lies, that he only told a lie like twice a year, you have got to be kidding me. You have got to be kidding me that Trump has told 103? That is not a real statistic.